Now, we're talking still about the Ratzim, the mysteries of the kingdom. And we have to talk about the whole business of the time and the ages and time and half the times and all this kind of stuff. There's a whole understanding that is kind of partially like the Vedic yugas, and it's partially like the Gnostic eons, and it's got other kinds of things. These are called the Olamim, the Jewish mystical Olamim, which I will explain to you. And Yeshua uses this language all the time. It's not properly translated in the New Testament. It all just comes through with eon or something like that. Sometimes in the New Testament they say eon or an eon of eons or for the eon or something. But the eon is the term for olam. Now, biblical language concerning forever and eternal and ages and eons and so on is based on the Hebrew concept and the Hebrew word olam, the Aramaic word. And olam is not a period of time. It's a Kabbalistic world. It's a state of reality, a state of existence, a state of consciousness. And if you put the Hebrew article ha, the, next to it, it makes a major difference about what it means. So, an olam is a specific eon, a specific stage of time, a world period or a state of reality. It's a term most usually mistranslated as eternal in the New Testament, as in eternal damnation. But there are many olamim, many different kinds of olams. Ha-olam, the olam, means heaven or the world of God. It means that's where you have, quote, eternal life, the life of the eon of God. That's divine life. It's the abode of saints, the eternal habitation, the pardes of God, the Merkaba of God. It's also called Ha-olam Abba, the coming divine age. And if you want to say forever, ever, you could say Ad Olam Ed. But the New Testament does not preserve these things. It has no way of translating it into Greek or into Gentile mentality, because it didn't know these things. The other thing that they couldn't do is translate the word soul. They just used the word suke, which we translate as soul, and pneuma, spirit. But there, in fact, are about 6 divisions of these things that make a big difference in terms of what this means. And they go all the way back to the Egyptian concepts of these. Ad olam ed means unto the limit of the olam and beyond, or for long ages. And it's not used in the New Testament, but it's used in prayer. If you want to say for always and ever, you can say ad olam ed. The olam of olamim is not used in Yeshua's teaching. If used, it would not refer to eternity as a measure of time, but a pluralma or fullness of all the eons. It's a Gnostic term not used in the New Testament, but if it were used, then you would say eternal. But that word is not used. Forever and ever is not used. A very important term is eternal life. It's translated in the New Testament. We see it in English as eternal life. It mistranslates, as I said, the life of the olam. It's not a measure of infinite time, an expression of the divine life of God Malkuth. And you can experience that here on earth as well as after death. And it's experienced by saints both in flesh and not in flesh. And the state of blessedness is rooted in the participation of a tzaddik, of a person who is a saint, or a person who is achieving inner purity and cleanness and going through the agon that Paul speaks of. In the Otz Hayim, it's in the participation of the tree of life. It's a tree or vine of life. It's talked about as a vine, the Son of Man, put in the words of Jesus saying, I am the vine, I am the bread. But it's the Son of Man that is the vine. It's the tree of life, and it's also expressed as the vine of life. And you are the branches, and so on. The vine of eternal life. The Baranash is the vine, and we are branches, and you partake of the manna of eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. The Baranash will give to you. The life of the Olam, which would be eternal life, is the inheritance of God's new humanity. And that means the life of the divine life of God. And it is a life of bliss. It is a life of the perfected beings, and it's not achieved in flesh. It can be experienced temporarily. Jewish apocalyptic mystics understood the ninth heaven, the Ennead, as the ninth olam, as the place where God's throne could be approached. It's beyond the zodiacal eighth heaven, or Agduat, or Muzaloth, the place of the constellations and so on. And they understood it to be a pleroma of primordial and luminous hypostases or emanations of God, which we call them angels. And other beings. There are other divine beings. There are divine animals and things and all kinds of weird things. But they're all emanations of Father, Mother, Godhead, the archangels. So in the highest form, which in Kabbalah is called Atziluth, that is where the abode of the archangels is. Not of the angels, but of the archangels, or of Messiah, or of Son of Man, or something like that. That's one kind of place or state. The Hekaloth mystics, who developed the Ennead, the ninth heaven, as the palace of God with all the different mansions, and that developed in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century in Judaism, developed this emanational concept into the four olamim, the four worlds. Now this may or may not have been in existence at the time of Yeshua, but the tree was definitely in existence, and the idea of the different heavens and so on. And the idea of the unfolding of the Sephirah, which is exactly among the Jewish Gnostics, was translated into the Hellenistic Gnostics at the pleroma of the eons from the Valentinian Gnosis. This is the unfolding of the Sephirah. Each Sephirah is a divine virtue, justice, radiance, these kinds of things. This is what makes up the name of God. Gnostic Christians, like Valentinus, came up with the idea of the pleroma of the eons as an androgynous syzygies. They're pairs. Masculine, feminine, male, female pairs of archetypes on the Jewish Kabbalistic model. And this is just a quick recap of the Valentinian Gnosis. If this is a slide from my seminar on Gnosticism. Some of you may have done it. The Jewish Christian Gnostic eons are similar to the Hindu Vedic lokas, or states of being. They're similar. They're not exactly the same. It's a different map of consciousness, but it's a map of consciousness. So you have the unknown father-mother, really is what you should say. The unknown father is what Valentinus calls him. And he emanates the pleroma of the eons. That is the fullness of all the olamim. And they are androgynous syzygies. They're male-female pairs. If you've ever seen Buddhist deities, they're always in Yab Yum. In Yab Yum, there's a male and female in sacred intercourse. And that is a union of the male and the female. Or as we were talking after this morning with the fellow who was doing the puja, I said, why do you call Kuan Yin him? And he went through a whole explanation I gave you yesterday about how the deities are neither male nor female, and you'll notice she doesn't have any breasts, but we all consider them to be male, and that's complete, and that's the way the Chinese will never accept Kuan Yin as a woman, and all this kind of stuff, you know. And so that's the thing, but this is the idea. And these each are syzygies that generate the next eons, the next ones. That's how they're generated. It's on the model of sexual generation. And so on. So you get a pleroma of eons. There are, in fact, 30 decans. They represent each they represent each 10 degrees. What is that, 30?
It should be 36. There are 36
Yeah,
decans.
but they have 30 decans.
Why is that?
So I'm not quite sure. Each represents 36 degrees of the zodiac. So...
No, that doesn't add.
Well...
A decan is 10, by definition. 30 times 10 is 300.
But this is the way that...
Valentinians didn't pay attention in astronomy class.
No, they set it out into 30 decans.
Okay.
And that's how it was set forth. Yeah, but it did relate astrologically. I'm not sure exactly why they call them
Well, they're leaving
decans.
out 6 decans, basically.
It's made each one a little bigger.
Well, it doesn't fit with your system, but it was their system. I'm explaining their system. And anyway, and then that included what was called the Upper Chachma, the Upper Sophia, Akamoth it's called in some of the Gnostic texts. And Akamoth, by leaving her, by separating herself from her male partner, she by herself conceived and brought forth Yaldabaoth, or Abraxas, who is the demiurge, the creator of the physical world of the Old Testament. And he is considered to be an evil god in some of the systems. And he thought he was the only god. He didn't know that the unknown Father existed and all this other existed. He was the actual only god that existed. And this is supposed to be the god of the Old Testament, who is the demiurge and who is the god of war and bashing the babies' skulls against the pavements and so on. And in order to salvage the situation, the Upper Sophia creates a Lower Sophia who creates Adam and Eve. Now, Yaldabaoth creates a worm. He creates the worm that we are. That is from the mouth to the anus. He just creates us as a biological entity, as flesh. And so Lower Sophia is the one who imbues us with the image of God and causes Yaldabaoth and all these lower creator demiurges to become jealous of mankind who's below them. But mankind will eventually become higher. But mankind has to go through all these trials because of these lower gods that are always trying to interfere with them, etc. That's the Valentinian, a very, very quick look at the Valentinian scheme. And eventually the humanity will rise above all this and be redeemed, but only after many, many trials, with the help of Sophia, the Lower Sophia, the lower manifestation. Now, in the teachings of Yeshua, I want to show how some of this was used. For example, in Matthew 12:31 in parallels, he says, I tell you, every blasphemy and sin will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. So this is after he's doing healing on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and it is legal, according to Jewish law, to heal with the word, not with your hands. And he's healing with the word, but he's criticized for healing on Shabbat by people that don't know the details of law. And so he says, well, then they say, well, okay, it's illegal for you to heal on the Shabbat, but you're healing by the power of demons. You're healing by the power of Beelzebub. And that's where he says, a house cannot stand, a house that's divided cannot stand. So how can Beelzebub cast out Beelzebub and all this sort of thing? And he says, and he says what they're seeing is the work of the Spirit, of the Spirit of God. They're seeing a good work and calling it evil. And that's, their mind is just looking at something good and calling it evil. So he says, anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man, against the Bar Anash, will be forgiven. But anyone who speaks against the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, will not find forgiveness either in this Olam or in the Olam Haba. Not in heaven and not on earth. Now this is one of the places where fundamentalists get their idea of eternal damnation. That was a Calvinist idea, that you will be forever damned. There are some people who will be forever damned. Now, what is the sin against the Holy Spirit? By looking at it, we can understand a little better what we're talking about. It's seeing what is good as evil. It's looking with the evil eye, which is a very definite thing. The evil eye is something you must not see with. Remove the log from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. When one sees with an evil eye, he curses himself. He makes himself blind, spiritually. Here's a parable of Yeshua. The master pays all the servants the high wage he promised to everybody who works for him, but he keeps hiring people all during the day. And at the end of the day, he pays everybody the same high wage he promised to the servants who started. So the people who started working at the beginning start bitching about it and saying, well, how come they're getting as much as we are? They're getting the same thing we do, and they only work for 2 hours. And then he says to them, is your eye evil because I am good? And this was this was probably a controversy among his disciples and other people too. Well, we were with you from the beginning, but this person has come in late, and why is he getting all the same thing? But anyway, this is an idea that people can after a long life of sin can change, and they still receive the same status as someone who started out and did the whole thing. It's like, the two brothers, and one of them runs off and spends all his inheritance. He's the prodigal son. He finally comes back, and there's another son who's been with him all the time, hasn't done anything bad. And then the father kills the fatted calf and makes a big thing. And so the son who's been good complains and says, well, how come the bad guy gets all this good treatment? I've been here all the time. And he says, well, you're with me all the time. And, that's your good thing. Don't worry about that. So this is a thing about what is the evil eye. What is looking at good as evil? So this is a major spiritual problem we don't have to overcome. Jesus says, first pull a log out of your own eye before you, and then you will see clearly to help your neighbor take the splinter out of his eye. First, work on your own stuff, and then you might be clear enough to help other people and guide them if they ask you. So are those who sin against the Holy Spirit eternally damned forever and forever? It sounds like eternal damnation in Greek in the New Testament, but what does it say in Aramaic? It says, will not find release from the bondage of evil. That's the word for forgiveness we're going to study. Will not find release either in their current state of consciousness, this olam, or in the divine malkuth, the olam that is to appear on earth. Now, the analogy is this, and some fundamentalist preachers get this because they have a good heart and they understand it. If a person turns his back to the light and looks into his own shadow, and that's what the evil eye is, not seeing what's good, then that person sees everything as negative. And until he takes his own initiative to turn around and see the light, everything will look equal to him that's good. And that's why people feel like they have a right. Yeshua says they will kill you thinking they do service to God. And this is the way people are. Fundamentalist Islamist people that go out and kill people and do all this kind of stuff. They're in this olam. They're sinning against the spirit of life, the spirit of God. They don't get it. And until they themselves turn around, they're in this thing. So they're caught in this olam. And it won't help them. They won't be in the olam haba or anything else until they themselves make that change. Yeah.
But it is as easy as turning around.
Well, that's a big thing.
I know it's a big thing for them to turn around.
Yeah, but they have to do it themselves. No one can do it for them.
But the point is that all they have to do is turn around.
Yeah.
And look at the light.
Well, that's just an allegory, an analogy.
I know it's an allegory. But what I'm saying is that it is really that simple to overcome the situation. Is for them to turn and look at the light.
Yeah.
But it is very difficult to get them to, in other words, I know that because of the mentality that they'll build up, or the dark karma that they're building up, and the anger and the hatred that they're building up, and everything, that they're digging themselves in deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're building this fear and hatred of everything that's good. It's extremely difficult.
But it doesn't end that way. It doesn't always end that way. And one of the nice things Buddhist teaching is that it's better for you to go and be reborn into a hell and burn away all this stuff than to keep repeating the same mistake over and over again, the same sins over and over. And even when we repeat the same sins over and over again, eventually they break us and make us turn. So there's two ways. There's the hard way and there's the easy way. And spiritual teaching teaches you the easy way. Because we all have to do this. We all have this problem. It's a problem we all have. But there's an easy way and there's a hard way. And if you accept the wisdom and make your mind soft, as the Buddhists say, or you stop your heart from being hard, as the Jews say, and become aware of that, you can remedy these things the easier way to do things. And so what he's saying is these hard asses are going to be cursing themselves until they stop cursing themselves. It's like this. Ouch, 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 ouch. Well, stop biting on your finger, for God's sake, you idiot, you know. But nobody can do it for him. He has to do it himself. And sometimes he can almost bite his finger off before he finally figures it out.
Don't you think some sins are so egregious that even if the person does, you know, turn around and, yeah, it's better for society that they stop, you know, murdering or raping people or beating their children or their spouses, but some sins are so egregious. Like, when Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted, he was like, well, it's okay, I found God now and I know I'm forgiven.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, if God forgives you for what you did, then God's forgiveness is not worth anything. I guarantee you, you're not forgiven.
God will forgive us for
It's
executing
so
you.
egregious, you know? I mean, and I just think it's trite when some people say, oh, I know I found God and I'm forgiven. And it's like, no, it's not worth anything if you can be forgiven for the egregious sins that you've done.
Well, and forgiven is a wrong concept. We're going to talk about it. It's released from bondage that you have you've taken on yourself. And Mother Jenny people couldn't believe her students because she was so loving and compassionate. And they were saying, there shouldn't be a death penalty. Nobody should be executed. She said, yeah, some people should be executed. Get rid of them. You know, and that's because you have to do that to protect society, because they're just a spewing thing for all these dark forces that are coming in. And that is the best thing you can do for them. Change will happen later in other lives or other kinds of ways. Yeah.
There's a famous story of Valmiki, who's the writer of the Ramayana, and he was actually a robber and a thief. And he, by mistake, started chanting the name of Rama because he was given, I forget how it goes, it's a funny story, but he was given something to chant, and if he kept chanting it, it sounded like Rama, Rama, Rama. I think he was given Amar or something else, and it became Mara, which means death. But if you keep chanting it, you end up with Rama. And he turned around and ended up writing, you know, the Ramayana. So there's that same concept that, yeah, if you do turn around and face the light, everything shifts.
Yeah, if you're Scrooge and something really happens, then you can turn around. You can turn around and do that in your lifetime, although not a lot of people will. But if you're a mass murderer and do awful, gross things like that, that doesn't work so well. What were you going to say?
Oh, when you mentioned about Mother Jenny and executions and things, you know, I understand that, yes, these people are trapped and they're being used as a channel by everything, but once they're released from their body, well, then there's nothing controlling them either.
Nothing controlling their body.
No.
And their
You
nephesh.
might have them contained, but in the body, but once their spirit or soul or however you want to say it leaves the body, we don't have any control over that. So then can't they create havoc as well?
They do. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
when I think 900 people all committed suicide from Jim Jones back in there, I saw this great egregor of people that were going to carry out Jim Jones' agenda. Jim Jones' agenda started with the assassination of the guy in San Francisco. Remember? I don't know if you remember.
Yeah,
all this.
Congressman?
Yeah,
Harvey Milk?
Harvey Milk and those people. And he had an agenda. He had a whole list of people to assassinate. And that would have happened. I contacted Bishop in Santa Barbara when he was living, great independent bishop, and Warren Waters. And I said, we have to do some work. We have to disperse this egregor. So we did special work through the Eucharist and through theurgical work to disperse this egregor so it wouldn't be a great dark force going around the world to influence other people to make more people go out and assassinate and do things like that. And nothing else happened on the agenda. But you're right, a tremendously possessed, obsessed person possessed by evil who's killed can become a thing because he won't die normally. After 40 days he won't dissolve and do the things he should be, which we'll be talking about later. And he will, at best, end up being an obsessing entity who can cause other people to do things. At worst, he can become a possessing entity. And those things have to be absolutely released. Those are nefeshes that have to be completely exorcised. That's why you don't harm people. You harm dark forces. You kill dark forces. Vajrapani, killer, slayer of demons. Louis Keizer, exorcist, superb. We're going to teach you a little bit more about that today, but it won't be recorded. Okay, next slide. One thing we should say, that I wanted to say, this does not mean that these people who sin against the Holy Spirit are eternally damned. Nothing is forever and ever. It's up to you, but it's not forever and ever. It could be a damn long time, though. But it's not forever and ever. And that's not what Yeshua ever taught when you go to Gehenna, when you go into the purgatories and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's talk about the Olamim in the teachings of Yeshua and hell specifically. Yeshua says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna. Now, first thing I wanted to say is I've told you about Yeshua uses a very common rhetorical thing that Jewish teachers use called hyperbole. He talks in extremes. That's why the fundamentalists who want to literally interpret things are dead meat to begin with, because they're going to have to deal with, you must hate your father and your mother if you are to be my disciple, and things like that. Those are not to be taken literally. They are ways of emphasizing something. As I've said before, if you strike a match in a dark room, it illuminates the room, but if you hold it up against the sun, it looks like it's black. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about with your love for God, your love for God's way, for justice, for truth, for things like that, has to exceed your biological love for your biological parents. And your devotion to real truth and real stuff cannot be swayed by family loyalties that are to things like prejudice. You know, your dad says all these things about niggers and all this kind of stuff. You don't have to do that, and you don't have to love that. You can love your parents, and you must honor your parents. That's Jewish. Honor your mother and your father, basic mitzvah. I don't care how badly you're abused, sexually abused, whatever. You must honor your mother and your father. But you must love God, Hesed. We're going to talk about what that means. And so he uses hyperbole. So you can't take him literally. You have to understand the spirit of what he says. Paul says, the literal interpretation kills. The spirit gives life. And he's absolutely right about that. What does this mean? You're going to have to gouge your right eye out, and you know, if it causes you to sin, you're going around like, you know, Jimmy Carter, and you're lusting after someone else, and you're confessing it to everybody, which is something you should have never said. But, you know, that means you got to pluck out your eyes so you won't see women's bodies, which are very beautiful and all this sort of thing. No, it doesn't mean that. It means you have to deal with, you have to be very strict with the impulse that causes you to do this. That's called the evil Keizer, which we'll be talking about in a while. He says also, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into life maimed than with two hands go on into Gehenna where the fire never goes out. Okay, here's what I want to explain about things. As we do bring our own punishment, and we do bring our own purification, I should say, upon ourselves when we are impure and when we follow the evil Keizer, which we'll be talking about in a minute here. But Yeshua does talk in hyperbole and these kinds of extremes to really emphasize something. Now, if you are a great devotee like Origen, who was one of the great writers of the 3rd century, and later he was condemned by the Council of Nicaea because he had a wrong idea, but he was still, people read him today as one of the great saints. But he took the little saying, Yeshua said, some people are born eunuchs, some people are made eunuchs, and some people make themselves eunuchs for the sake of the Malkuth, the kingdom of heaven. So he went and took a clamshell, sharpened it all up, and cut his balls off. And he made himself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven. And now Yeshua was a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven. He was not, he didn't have a wife, he wasn't traveling with a wife, he had long hair like a Nazarite, and he had denied himself pleasure and privileges and things like that. He was a man of sorrows during his ministry. He was not a hedonist, although he was certainly not a crazy ascetic either. But he had made himself a eunuch for the sake of the Malkuth. That means he had devoted himself thoroughly to that, and that was his first priority, not his own pleasure, and not his own pleasuring himself with a partner and all those sort of things. So That's what he meant when he said, some make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. But of course, unfortunately, Origen took it literally, like the fundamentalists do. And if the fundamentalists take it literally, I invite them all to get a clamshell. And he cut off his testicles and made himself a real eunuch, no more male hormones. And was a great, great mystic and all that sort of thing. But he was actually condemned for that as a wrong way of understanding the teachings of Yeshua. Yes?
In the novel you had, Jesus get married. Do you think that there could have been that in real life?
Of course, that's why I put it in. I don't think there's any other way he could have understood women the way he did. And you might have noticed that also his wife who died became sort of like a tutorial spirit of the opposite sex. And I made it comparable to Yehid and Yehida in the novel and so on. I happen to be very romantic about that. But Yehid and Yehida are not soulmates, they're spirit mates, they're one being. And that's a little different than, these sort of psychics tell you about soulmates and things like that. I think you have many soulmates and so on. But anyway.
Did you find evidence of that?
I laid out my evidence in the explanation in the book. Yeshua was the only rabbi who took women disciples, understood women things, respected women in a whole different kind of way. And it was definitely not so much from his mother, because his mother was not even a disciple. And so that's my fictional way of doing it. I don't know whether he was married or not, but that's the way I did it in the book, because I think it was logical that he was. I don't think Jesus is running around with long hair like a Nazarite and being an ascetic from the time he was 12 years old. I think that he was a much older man when he appeared in this way, and he'd had much life go on behind him before that. He just knew too much to be, like a Catholic who became a priest when he was 13 or 15 or a monk or something and didn't know anything of anything. He knew too much of the real world. That's my opinion. But anyway, getting back to this, what about hell? What about, how important it is for you to stop your bad behaviors and your bad ways of dealing with things. Matthew 10, he says, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. And the soul refers to the nephesh. Gehenna is, let's look at what Gehenna was. It was a city dump outside the south wall of Jerusalem. It stretched out to the Kidron Valley. And it was a place where people put their garbage. The Jews lived with their garbage. They put it outside the walls. They were into hygiene. And however, outside this was the place where all the filthy stuff was. There was a lot of spontaneous combustion, fires that would be there, or fires, things that were being burned there. The word means Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna. And it was filled with a lot of smoldering fires and smoke and spontaneous combustion. So that's the image he's using. And it's a place where things that are discarded and unwanted and not useful anymore are either being smashed to pieces or they're being burned and transformed into smoke and things like that. That's the way garbage is dealt with. They're going through a transformation. So it's a form of purification. The word pure is the Greek word pur and means fire. It's the word for fire, by transformation by fire. Now it smoked and it reeked of foul odors, and it was a place of refuse and return of things to their elemental natures. And Gehenna came by extension the Hebrew term for the olam of a soul's purgation after death. And it was used not just by Yeshua, it was used by other people. The duration of your term in Gehenna depended upon the level of impurity that was being dealt with. And in the rabbinic, the quotations of rabbis will talk about how long you'll have to spend in Gehenna and so on. It was comparable to Egyptian and Pythagorean and Vedic concepts of soul trial after death, and it was a purification. So it's actually more not really like what Christians or Calvinists call hell. It's more like what we call purgatory. And so the Catholic doctrine of purgatory has developed from this and from a lot of ancient theories. Now, there was one doctrine of eternal damnation that existed in the ancient world. That was among the Orphics. And the Orphic preachers, who were sort of fundamentalists, taught that, you know, if you didn't become an Orphic and do everything the way that they said, that after death you would forever and ever be tortured. So the concept of torture forever and ever was not something taught by Yeshua, but it was out there, and it got eventually taken into Christianity. By the 3rd or 4th century, the Gospel of Nicodemus, they're talking about all the people who persecute Christians as suffering forever in the burning lake of pus. So, you know, I mean, Christians lose their compassion for their enemies very quickly and come up with eternal damnation rather quickly. In the teachings of Yeshua, as opposed to the philosophers who said that death ended all existence and there'd be no consequences for moral sins, these are the philosophers that Socrates opposed, and who said that after death there's nothing, and so therefore, you know, do whatever you want, and, you know, what do they say, something...
Eat, drink,
and be merry, yeah, you know, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, and all that sort of stuff. Yeshua warned that one's good and evil deeds follow him after death and determine the conditions of that thing for him, just like the Buddhists talk about. He emphasized the importance of sanctification, cleansing yourself, making yourself pure and righteous and in tune by using his familiar method, I told you, of hyperbole. You must hate your father and your mother, and all of it. It's an analogy of radical surgery to remove diseased organs. Because there's sometimes when the only thing that's left is surgery. You can't heal something that goes beyond a certain point in your body. You've got to remove it or it will make everything die. Yeshua's Gehenna represented an olam, or a state of existence. It's a consequence of sin. It's a self-chosen bondage to sin. And that bondage has to eventually be burned away. It's like burning away a bad karma. And it existed as an olam both during life and after death. So you could be in Gehenna while you're alive, you could be experiencing it, and you could be in Gehenna after you die. So how long does this olam last? Well, again, it's not a state of time, it's a state of existence. Yeshua said you will not get out till you've paid the last penny. You got to wait till all your karma's burned. And it all depends on what you're dealing with and what it is that you've bonded yourself to. People create their own personal hells and remain in them until they've exhausted all the internal inclinations that led them there. But it's not forever. And Yeshua never taught a forever and ever hell and damnation. Christian purgatory and hell developed from these concepts. Early Christianity equated Gehenna with the Orphic concept of underworld punishment in Hades, which became the medieval Anglo-Saxon hell. Hades was a very positive concept in the ancient world. It was the world of Pluto, the world of Hades, and the world of the wealth. It was where all the corn and all the things that grew out of the fields came from. All the wealth, the treasures in the earth that were mined and so on came from Hades. And the queen of Hades, Persephone, was the great, she was like Kuan Yin. She was the one who gave blessings and so on. But in Christianity, of course, paganism was denounced, and so all of the deities became demons and so on. And so the idea of the underworld was the place where people would go, where there was a lot of volcanic activity and sulfurous things come out of the earth, and that was the idea of hell. It was called Hades in Christianity. But Catholic theology divided Gehenna into the concept of purgatory as a temporary purification for heaven, and hell for souls too evil for purgatory. Here's the Virgin Mary holding her baby right here, and here's all the people in purgatory, and she's having compassion on them and helping them to come up into heaven when they finally get burned up enough. And so that's a concept. In fact, the Catholics pray for the blessed souls in purgatory, so on after death. And I felt what that feels like. I know that people right after death go through a very hellish experience, and that you can help them when they do. So that's based on existential reality that people do sense, if you're sensitive. Here's the hell. This is, you can't see this very well. I wish we had more, better lighting, but here's Satan with a little thing up here that says, "Lose hope, all ye who enter therein or something like that, you know. You're gone. Forever and ever, you're going to just be tortured. And so on. And in the Apocalypse of John, which is a very late writing, which was not accepted by the churches until actually the 3rd century as part of the canon, he does talk about the worm burning forever and forever and this kind of thing. Yeshua's temporal Gehenna evolved into the Christian eternal damnation and other forever and ever type doctrines. But that was not what he taught. So let's talk about the Olam and the 4 Olamim. This is developed after the time of Yeshua, but all the seeds for it were in the Kabbalistic teachings. And so let's look at it. The Sefer Yetzirah, which is written perhaps in the 2nd century BC, and that implies it was an oral Kabbalistic tradition for many, many centuries beforehand, talks about the emanation of Godhead. God isn't a creator who carves the universe like somebody working with wood or ice or stone. He emanates it. Everything in the universe is of God. The Psalm says, if I go to the deepest hell, you are there. If I go to the highest heaven, you are there. God is everywhere and everything. And in the emanation of Godhead, in the Kabbalistic view, it begins with what we call ayin, the Hebrew word for not. At first, there is nothing. Nothing at all. God is not. And if you read Basilides, or if you read Vedic stories of the creation of things, it starts out with absolutely not. God does not exist. God is non-existent. To exist in Greek means to manifest in some way. God is totally unmanifest. The universe is unmanifest. Basilides says, in the very beginning, there was nothing. When I say nothing, I mean no thing at all. And I don't mean anything that can be named or anything that cannot be named. Things that cannot be named and can be named are not there. And there was no this and there was no not this. And there was, he's trying to explain what this concept of void is. And that's what ayin is. That's the way it begins. And then I represent this with a big black blob here.
That's the pre-bang.
That's the pre-bang. This is Ein Sof. This means without limit. Infinity. Infinity, without limit. In infinite forms. That's the second part of the manifestation. And then the Ein Sof Or. The unlimited or limitless or infinite light. Now, someone like Paracelsus and later stories, and in Tibetan Buddhism, in Vajrayana Buddhism, more advanced Mahayana, there are 4 divisions or 3 divisions, it depends on the system, of this light. This light, this limitless light, this Ein Sof Or, is called Rigpa in Buddhism, something like it. In Paracelsian terms, it is sometimes the 4th Iliaster or the 1st Iliaster, but in terms of creation, it's the 1st Iliaster. That means the heavenly light. And there are 4 Iliasters. When you meditate on the white light, that's the 4th, the lowest form. In Buddhism, you go through the 4th to the 3rd to the 2nd, and finally, the 2nd is completely lack of consciousness, and then in the 1st, you are in the clear light, the Rigpa. So this is an idea. And these ideas go back to mystic traditions, lots of different places. They're very shamanic. And then out of Ein Sof and Ein Sof Or manifest Keter, the crown. This is the seed of the manifest universe. And out of Keter manifests all the rest of the Sephirot. The Sephirot means a vessel. It contains the virtues and powers of Godhead. And the archetypal world of the 10 Sephirot begins to develop. The Sephirot are first isolated from each other. They are covered with coverings. Those coverings are called klipot. They are veils. And there are 7 veils on each one. And before anything can happen, before time can begin, the vessels have to be shattered. The klipot have to be broken into shards, like a broken pot. And that allows communication to happen between all these vessels, and then the 22 paths of wisdom are formed. And the 22 paths of wisdom plus the 10 Sephirot make the 32 paths of wisdom. So the vessels being isolated have to be shattered. And in the shattering of the vessels, it puts them in communication, and it also separates the image of God, which is made of light and made of all the contents of the vessels, with the external part that was holding them, which becomes negative energy. It's like positive energy, negative energy, dualism, dualistic things. So the klipot are the origin of what we call evil, but we should probably call negativity. The klipot are energies that are absolutely opposed to life, living, happiness, harmony, etc. The klipot are energies that try to create disharmony and promote all these kinds of things. The klipot are, as beings, as intelligent beings, laugh and enjoy it when people suffer, and they try to corrupt and destroy and so on. That is the origin, the Kabbalistic origin of evil. It's necessary. And Yeshua said, it is necessary that this happen. It is necessary. We get the term necessary evil from this, although that's a little different thing. That's like the lesser of two evils. You can vote for George Bush, or you can vote for, whatever. But this is the Kabbalistic explanation for light and darkness, good and evil type of thing, and it's understood as positivity and negativity. And ultimately, the darkness will be swallowed up in light. Ultimately, the klipot will be transformed into light. And there will not be duality. There will be unity. Now, the shards, the klipot, are means literally the broken dark forces that coexist, intermixed with the light. And they're voids or vortices of negativity and opposition to unity, love, health, intelligence, psychic obstacles to union. Plato referred to this as the motion to the left, as opposed to the motion to the right. The motion to the left is the motion of the planets and other kinds of things that are part of harmony, that create things that happen. Create our personalities and things like that are all based on the negativity of the universe. And the philosopher's way is the motion to the right, which is the motion of unity, the motion of the higher. And in this case, the klipot will become part of what are called the evil Yetzer, the evil impulse in the heart of a human being, which is ultimately not real. But the good Yetzer, the Yetzer HaTov, is the image that everything is created in the image of God, and that's a divine image, and that is real, and ultimately the unreal will pass away. So, but in the meantime, there has to be a left foot and a right foot in order to walk. And so this has to work. So therefore, in the Kabbalistic view, God is a creator of good and evil. God is the creator of Leviathan, the evil dragon, but he leads him around by the nose with a leash. God is in control of all that stuff. So, the good thing about all this is that it produces the image of God, which is sometimes called Adon or Macroprosopos, the vast face, and it is what Plato called the Son of God. That is his term. And there are many other terms for it, but that's why people place the Sephirot in certain parts of the body and all this sort of thing. But basically, this is the image of God, the imago Dei. This is also another way of saying that this is the good impulse, the good creative impulse. There is also what in Kabbalism is called the small face. This is the reflected, I've called this in the THG teachings, reflected reality. This is between the firmament between the divine world and the reflected world. We see everything backwards. We see it as a reflected image. And we see everything distorted. And we can't see anything like this. And so here we have the divine faces reflected in matter. And there are many stories, the Hermetic story of the primal anthropos, the primal man who is androgynous, and he bends down through the spheres and finds himself in bondage to them because, like the Greek story of Narcissus, who comes down and sees a reflection in the mirror and then falls in love with herself, he sees his reflection in this kind of reality and becomes attached to it. And because it becomes attached to it, becomes bonded to it, and is under the bondage of all that, and is now subjected to the planets and all this kind of stuff. So I refer to it as the reflected or inverted reality of our world. We can never really see face to face. We see darkly as in a mirror. Ha'olam refers to all worlds and all worlds yet to unfold from it. It is everything. In Kabbalistic reality, our world, the world we live in, the world of physical reality, is just 1/10 of an entire kind of world we can't see, which is in itself just 1/4 of another of the whole Olam. So it's something like the Vedic idea that we just don't see what's really there. We can't do it. There's no way for us to comprehend it. And when astronomers first discovered that all the stars in the sky was not everything was the universe, and they just realized, oh my gosh, it's just a galaxy that happens to be so immense there's no way to comprehend it. And when we look up, we're looking through all the stars in our galaxy, but some of those little fuzzies are another whole galaxies, island universes, way far away, full of as many stars, and there are billions and billions of them, and we don't even know, you know. And when people understood that, a lot of people, theosophists and people like this, were already saying that was the structure of the universe, because they were taking Vedic ideas, and Blavatsky and people were saying this, and scientists were astounded by the fact that people would have this knowledge long before they did. And you know, when Hubble took his telescope and figured out that what the distances were and the motions to other galaxies and things, this was the beginning of our modern understanding of what we call a physical universe, which in the Kabbalistic world is just 1/10 of 1/4 of the universe. So, anyway.
Do those numbers correspond with string theory?
String theory, some parts of string theory, as I understand it, postulate 9 dimensions. They postulate that at the beginning of this universe, and we don't know what would be before that or around that or whatever, they think of it as brains, membranes of different universes that can go between each other and create universes. They postulate that the 3 dimensions that we understand, and then the 4th dimension that we understand of time, the only way we can see a 4th dimension is by seeing things as they move in time, and that has to be great. That has to be done on the 4th dimensional thing, which is only mathematical. We can only mathematically see that. And when Einstein was told by a brilliant Italian mathematician, was finally able to get all the formulas for electromagnetic energy, which had been developed earlier by scientists, and they did work, but they wouldn't work with the formulas developed for relativity with a 4-dimensional universe until they were taken to the 5th power. So when you take those formulas to the 5th power, or the 5th dimension, now we can understand things about what today we would call the quantum universe. We can understand why it is that 2 electrons can occupy the same space, which we can't do in physical reality, and why something on one side of the universe can affect something on the other side, and things like that. Well, anyway, string theory postulates at this point, I believe, 9 dimensions. They're all wrapped up inside. So if you want to see what it looks like, you can take 1 dimension and you can get a line, 2 dimensions you can get a plane, 3 dimensions you can get a cube, and then if you take it to 4 dimensions you get a tesseract, which is a cube inside a cube, And as you go into the dimensions, they go inside, 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 inside. So reality goes in terms of dimensions, and we can't see those dimensions with our eyes beyond the third dimension. We can understand as a philosopher up to the fourth dimension, as we understand history and time and trends and things like that. We can only represent the rest mathematically, but we know it exists because we can come up with mathematics that describes things that we see happen. So a lot of people who are scientists, a lot of people who are Kabbalists, a lot of scientists are Kabbalists, a lot of Kabbalists are scientists, they are physicists and things like that. They like this stuff because Kabbalah has so many wonderful things. This is what the 32 paths would be related to, and I call this 32 paths of Genesis because this is developed according to the paths, the 22 paths that connect all these are developed according to the names of God used in the first chapter of Genesis, and whether God speaks and God says and God this and all this sort of thing. But
The
this
paths
is
are the names?
pardon?
You said the paths are the names?
The paths are what God says or God creates or God. That's how they're related by Kabbalists later. But this is what we call the pre-fallen image of God. This is the shape of your soul, and this is actually a two-dimensional portrayal because it's actually, we understand it better as cubes and things, but there are Kabbalists that do this sort of thing. But I'm just showing you the traditional tree method. That's not the tree you normally see. This is called the pre-fallen state. This is the state of the image of God within you, of the Yetzerim, before we are incarnated and before we become who we are. After that happens, it changes. Now, the emanation of the four worlds comes through the prolapse or fall of this middle pillar. And this is what incarnation is all about. What happens is Tiferet moves down here and it becomes the Keter for the next Olam, like that. And this becomes what we call the fallen universe. It creates the microprosopus, it creates the universe that we understand. And that's the kind of tree you will see in the medieval Kabbalists that they will put out. Tifereth becomes Keter of the next universe and the crown for the next lower world. And so you get this kind of a manifestation. This is the first Olam, this is the first and second Olam, this is all the way down to the fourth Olam. And you can read this on the slide, there's words that you can read there. The four worlds is the Olam of Olamim, and doesn't mean forever and ever, it just means the existential structure of reality. The first world, the highest reality is Atziluth. That's called the Olam, Ha'olam. That's the abode of the throne of God. And then the next one is Bria, or Baria. That is the place where the archangels exist, and that's where and they are the rulers, and they're the ones that rule the hosts of God. And that third world is called Yetzirah, the world of formation. It's where thought, not just thought, but where intellect, where knowledge starts to take on form so it can manifest, and that's where the angels exist. The angels are under the rulership of the archangels. And it's called the world of formation. It would be comparable somewhat to Plato's world of forms or ideas or ideation, or the lowest emanation of the supernal realities. The Vedic term manas would refer to what it is that forms things in our world, which is Asiya, of which we only can be aware of a tenth of it. This is the perceptible universe, the bottom tenth is Malkuth, which we are in. You understand that way. So this is a Kabbalistic view of the creation of the world, the emanation world, where evil comes from, what evil is, and all this sort of thing, and how angelic beings, which are hypostases, emanations of God's intelligence, relate. Now, there are good and evil angels, the Malachim. We invoke the angels for Shabbat. We said, what did we say? What did we sing?
Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom, yeah. The angels of
Malachim.
Shalom. A Malach is a messenger from a king in the old world, in the pre-exilic time before the Babylonian captivity. It was, as a good spirit, was a divine messenger from the throne of God who appears on earth as a human being. So you would meet these messengers from God as people. And you can see how Abraham meets these people. They're called Malachim and so on in the Old Testament. Prophets were also called angels. In fact, in the early church, bishops were called angels, although all the bishops I know don't really qualify. But anyway, that one of the prophets is Malachi, which means Malachi, which means my messenger, my angel. An angel of Yahweh appears to Elijah as a human being. That would be what we would say a bodhisattva can appear to you in a nirmana kaya, which is anybody he chooses at any time would appear to you, and he would have that body. And so, for example, Elijah is visited by an angel. Angel's like a person. Paul says, beware, you might meet an angel unawares. Always be kind to the stranger, because you don't know who that stranger is. He may be an angel, Well, we take what we see in life as an allegory and as omens and as telling us things. We're learning things. Indians learn things from the directions that animals come in and what kind of animals they are. We can learn things from what person appears to us and presents what problem to us and how it does things. So these are all messengers. They're messengers like that. But they were seen as in human form. An evil spirit was called Elilin, later known as Lilith, an evil vampire and destroyer of newborn infants, and the first wife of Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of wonder about this. I think this is a place where this Lilith was a female, natural woman of the earth who didn't buy into Adam's deal.
Exactly. She didn't like being on the bottom.
I think she got demonized.
Of course.
That's what I
We
think.
will be talking about that. We're going to go
Yeah,
much more into
good.
that.
Yeah.
And both were, there was also what was called a Shedem cult alongside the Yahweh altars. And you would propitiate spirits who could protect you and could destroy you. Sometimes they were spirits of ancestors, but it was called the Shedem cults, and they were always right alongside the altars, the Yahweh altars. And that was, many of them became then the cults of, that were related to Ashtaroth and things like that, Mrs. God, this sort of thing, the idea of the Spirit of God, Holy Spirit, and so on. The priests in the Babylonian exile codified the written and oral tradition of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, Israel and Judah. They wrote it down, so we started to have a religion of the book, because there were court chronicles and there were prophetic records and things like that. And they composed the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, known as the Pentateuch. And so even though Genesis talks about the creation of the world, it's a really very, very late production. The earliest thing in the Old Testament are the stories of the woman warrior, what is her name, who conquers somebody attacking one of the tribes. The Song of Deborah. Yeah, Song of Deborah is probably the oldest thing we have. That's actually the most ancient thing we have preserved in the Old Testament. And then there are lots of other things. The Book of Psalms preserves 1,000 years of wisdom sayings from the Edomites and the Egyptians, and that got taken into the wisdom tradition. The Book of Job was written over a couple of centuries. It's really a dialogue about why do the good suffer. When the earlier idea, before the kingdom of Judah was overthrown, after they had done their reforms and done everything and thrown out, the Mrs. God and done all the good things the prophets told them to do, and they still got conquered and taken away. Why did the righteous suffer? Because before that they had the Deuteronomic concept, and you read in the book of Deuteronomy. If you do keep all God's laws and do all the things that they tell you and the prophets tell you to do, then God will bless you and have a good life. And if you are having a good life and you're blessed and you're wealthy and you're healthy, God loves you. That's proof. If you're poor and you're sick, God doesn't love you. You're doing something wrong. You're sinning. A Deuteronomic concept. Didn't work. Didn't prove out. And so after the Babylonian concept, well, why is it that the good suffer? Or why do the righteous suffer? And Job is tested by Shaitan. And now we get the concept of Shaitan, which we're going to talk about soon. So in Genesis, we have the cherubim, the holy beasts that guard the throne of God in the four directions, placed at the four corners of Eden with flaming swords to exclude mankind from paradise. This is the first we hear of this kind of thing, really. And this is written in the book of Genesis, which is 6th century. It's pretty late. It's way after Mrs. God and all those other guys. And the angel of Yahweh speaks to Sarah and Hagar and Abraham and in a dream to Jacob. Jacob sees a ladder. He was protected and visited by angels. This is like the Hermetic idea of the above and below and the gradation stood above and below Jacob's vision of the ladder of angels. But Jacob is also given a name. What is the name that Jacob is given? Israel. Israel. What does Israel mean? The one who struggles with God. And so we see in our liturgy, anyone who struggles with God is Israel. And I say all humanity is Israel. Because he who struggles spiritually is part of Israel. Now, whether you like it or not, consciously or not, you're doing it. So, there you are. He who struggles with God, that's what Israel is. In Exodus, Yahweh appears to Moses in a flame of a burning bush. Now, this is not what happened 1200 BC. This is what the priests wrote 600 BC, their concept of God. And he guides the Hebrew Exodus as a pillar of flame and a cloud, as his angel does, and he drives away enemies of Israel and all this sort of thing. So this is where we get these concepts. Now, in the post-exilic period, in the Haggadah and the apocalyptic period, we have psalms about mankind, being Adam is created, quote, a little lower than the angels. Yahweh is Adonai, Lord or Master of the hosts of angelic and other heavenly beings, and God gives his angels charge as protectors over those who would love him. Now we're getting angels. We're getting the angels of God are starting to appear in this kind of literature. In the Job cycle, archangels are part of the heavenly court. This is Satan, Shaitan. Later he will be given the Latin name Lucifer because he was an angel of light. But his job in Job is, he's in heaven, he's not out of heaven, and he's the court prosecutor. His job, in fact, is to be the person who accuses or tries or tests human souls. And he looks out and he sees Job, who is a tzaddik. He's a righteous man. He's a saint. He gives to the poor. He treats everybody right. He is pious and does his worship and everything. And he says, let me have him for a while. I bet I'll show you that he really doesn't have everything pure and good. And Yahweh says, okay, but just don't kill him. Whatever you want to do, just do all stuff. So if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So Satan goes down and does every damn awful, horrible thing to Job, and he loses his family, and he loses his wealth, and his wife says, curse God and die. God does this. This is, people say, how can God let this happen, to me? It's not God, and even in the New Testament we say it is not God who tests and tries you. We test and try ourselves with our own lusts and so on. That's what Shaitan is. Mother Jenny used to say, the devil is the evil of your own nature. And but he starts up in heaven, and he's an archangel, not just an angel. He's an archangel. He's the heavenly prosecutor, and his job is to prosecute human souls in order to make them more pure for greater purposes. In the Enochian cycle of literature, we have the story of the rebellion of Satan and his hosts, and he's cast out of heaven, and the archangel Michael fights him, and he's cast down to the fifth heaven. That's where they live. The Haggadah is Satan's original name was Oriel or Lucifer, the light bearer. It's based on Isaiah, well, the light of God.
But that's one of the archangels.
It is. It is in Martinism. It's one that I evoke every day. Anyway, based on Isaiah 12:14, how thou art fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. It referred originally to the planet Venus, and St. Jerome in the 4th century substituted the Latin word Lucifer, light bearer. Anyway, that's where that came from, yeah.
I heard somebody say that that actually referred to like the king of Babylon or something. That this was actually a reference to him, that he was...
Yeah, Isaiah, this is the first part of Isaiah written by, apart from the historic Isaiah, pre-exilic Isaiah, before we get into Deutero-Isaiah. And this is part of the prophecies about the troubles and problems that happened to the king of Babylon. Yeah, that's what it was probably referring to historically. Yeah.
We might want to think about breaking
Oh yeah.
lunch soon.
Okay, let me finish this slide.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So Lucifer means light bearer?
In Latin, it means carrier of light. A thurifer is a carrier of incense, and that's what it does and so on. Anyway, Venus, which is associated with Ishtar and Astarte.
Man, that chick needs a podiatrist.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you. And all the bishops I know need podiatrists. But anyway, Venus is associated with Lilith. That's Adam's first wife in the Kabbalistic stories. She was created on the 5th day, and that would be, and she abandons him. She decides he's a jerk, and she doesn't want to be with him. So she's a separate being from Adam. She's not created out of Adam. Adam is not incarnate yet. He's in the Pardes. He's in the 3rd heaven. So Lilith is, in Kabbalistic stories, is his first wife, but she doesn't like being on the bottom for sex. In fact, that's one of the explanations some of the rabbis. She just doesn't like it. She doesn't like that position. She doesn't like that. She doesn't like any of the things that he wants her to do. And so she leaves. She just flies away and she leaves. And that's when Adam cries for a mate, and God says, okay, and then he divides them into 2. But they're still not incarnate. They're still in Pardes. Anyway, that was supposedly the first wife of Adam.
And this is in the Old Testament?
No, this is Kabbalistic Haggadah.
Oh.
This is the Haggadah. This is what's not written in the Old Testament. It's what's interpreted by the rabbis and Kabbalistic rabbis from early times. It's actually a lot of Babylonian interpretation. Mm-hmm. And in the Christian tradition, Satan is said he can manifest as an angel of light. I think Paul says that. Well, that's his origin. That's really the origin of Shaitan. So here we have Shaitan as an angel of light. The Kabbalistic Satan, in the Kabbalistic stories, he's the serpent who tested Eve. But in some stories, it's Lilith who is the serpent who tested Eve. And in other stories, it's God himself and the guys who tested Eve as a serpent. But anyway, the Kabbalistic temptress is Lilith. And she becomes actually Yahweh's consort in some traditions. She's the wife of God, and he prefers her to Matronite. And she is the Klippa of Malkut. She is the Klippa that has the power over our physical world in those traditions. And very often in the ancient world, men preferred their hetaira, their lover, their mistress, to their wives. And so she was really kind of the mistress of God, and Matronite was the wife. And, you know, there's all kinds of these Kabbalistic ideas. The mother of the Messiah probably comes from this image. Because in the story, the Kabbalistic stories, Istahar, which is obviously from the Babylonian name Ishtar, is this female deity who is beloved of Yahweh and part of the heavenly realm and so on. And she learns Hashem. She learns the proper pronunciation of the name of God, which we're going to be discussing in a while, from the fallen angel Shem Hazai. When the angels come down and they want to mate with the daughters of men, she refuses to do so. She's the only one who doesn't allow herself to be had by the angels, which is the cause of the fall of the world and all this. So she promises that she'll have sex with him if he will just tell her the mystery of the name Hashem, the name of God. And he tells her, and then she runs away. You know, the Jews do this stuff all the time. You know, Jacob and all these people do this, you know. And the stolen blessing. And she does this in exchange for promise of sex, and then she uses Hashem to ascend to heaven. So this is some indication that you do use the name of God as part of Merkaba mysticism. She uses the name to ascend to heaven and manifests as the constellation Virgo. Now this is exactly what we find later in the Revelation of St. John. It's the constellation of Virgo that's related to the woman in heaven who is giving birth to the Messiah and so on. Yeah.
And who says it's not a patriarchal society?
Yeah. Now, quite a bit of what I'm going to say in this slide, I already said on the earlier slide. I was talking about the concept of spirit in the Hellenistic Jewish wisdom schools from the 5th to the 1st century before the Christian era, and the idea of invisible spirits. And this is the first and primary one was the Job cycle, which I told you was actually not just written by one person, it was added to. It grows over a couple of centuries. It's a school of Job, we call it. And it deals with why the righteous suffer and all this kind of stuff. And it was an antidoting and updating the Deuteronomic concept that the righteous are rewarded on earth and the evil are punished on earth by God. And so they figured out that didn't happen. And but this Job story first appears about 1000 BC when Egypt is going into great decline, and it's a dialogue between a man and his soul. And he talks about why he's suffering and why the righteous are suffering. It's an old theme that goes in different wisdom schools, the Edomite schools and the Egyptian schools. But Shaitan, the adversary, as I said, is the prosecutor in the heavenly court. He's called also Diabolos, which means the opponent or the accuser, and it becomes devil in our language. And he oversees the trying of human souls. And unfortunately, the word testing or trying becomes temptation in the King James Version. So it sounds like being tested is like being tempted with strange fruits or something. That's not what it means. In the Kabbalistic Haggadah of the story of the Nephilim, the giants who are, the Nephilim are fallen ones. They are, a race of giants is produced by angels who come down to earth, and they're supposed to guard and help humans, but instead they end up interbreeding with the daughters of men. And in Genesis 6, and because the sons of the Elohim did this, the Elohim flooded the earth and created the first flood and the purification of the earth, and that was the beginning of the Noachic period. Now, the rabbis and the Kabbalistic rabbis consider this to be the cause of the fall, the cause of sin, not the fall of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, which is in the third heaven, and it's only when they're expelled from the Garden of Eden and given coats of skin, that means they're put into incarnation and they come into our realm down here, into incarnation. So rabbis consider that the fallen ones, the Nephilim and all this sort of thing, would be the basis of sin. And it developed into whole stories about the disobedience of Shaitan. Now, as I said, Mother Jenny said something very important. She said the devil is just the evil of our own nature. And so it's very interesting that the fall of Satan comes parallel to the fall of Adam, the fall of mankind, for disobedience to God. And So it's a great war in heaven and all this sort of thing. He's cast out with all of his host of angels, and now he brings evil upon mankind. He dwells actually in the fifth heaven. So there are two kinds of good and evil spirit, or shedu, during this period of time. In Job, for example, 4:15, he says, "Then a spirit passed before my face, the hair of my flesh stood up." That was the idea of an evil spirit, a nature spirit, a spirit of an ancestor. It's associated with a breath or a wind. You could feel it. The spirit of an angel will ripple the water at the pool of Siloam, and so on. Job, again, "The Spirit of God hath formed me, and the Ruach of the Almighty hath given me life." That's divine spirit. So in Job, spirit is now perceived like Greek pneuma, like a wind. It was not before. That's not how spirit was perceived before. Spirit was perceived in omen animals, like the owl of Athena would be among the Greeks. The animals that would appear that would be omens of spirit and so on. But now it's perceived as a breath or a wind. The feminine ruach is what formed him. So she's the creatrix. And the ruach of El Elyon, the Almighty, gave him life. So this is where we finally get this idea that the spirit is the creator itself, is the creatrix. So never talk about the creator, talk about the creatrix. That's what is proper understanding. It's the female that gives, with the feminine God at least, that gives the life.
Trix makes it feminine?
Yeah. Now, there are divine spirits and infernal spirits. The Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, 2nd to 1st BC, which were Jewish texts transmitted only by Christians with a bunch of Christian interpolations, talk about the divine and infernal spirits within the human soul. This was definitely part of the Kabbalistic knowledge of Yeshua and his people. Babylonian deities, as we studied in other things, were transformed into Jewish evil demons and fallen angels. With some of the great high beings were transformed into lower inferior beings. Excuse me. And Lilith becomes a terrifying goddess of the underworld. She becomes like Greek Hecate, who guards the crossroads. She's, as I said, Kabbalistically the original wife of Yahweh and the original wife of Adam, and she becomes, in the Christian thing, a vampire. She sucks energy from things, and she is the one who is responsible for sucking the life from newborn children, and they have to be protected from her with various rituals that people still do in a lot of Jewish communities in Europe. Now, Asherah is the Babylonian mother goddess. She's related to Astarte, and she develops into the Christian medieval male demon, Astaroth. And Asherah is already, when you said she needed a good pedicurist or something like that, but she is the mother goddess of animals and plants and things, because women did that. Women are the ones who invented agriculture, they invented animal husbandry and so on. So here's Ashtaroth. This is a medieval drawing of what poor old Asherah developed into as a Christian demon. So the naming of infernal spirits, Shaitan and his evil spirits or fallen spirits, and the names of these angels became a very important part of knowledge in Solomonic magic. And one was able to exercise and do things by knowing their names, because if you have the name of something, you have power over it. And they became, or however originally, they were just called the spirit of envy, the spirit of deceit, and the spirit of fornication, and things like this. There were names for divine spirit. It was called the Ruach. It was called the Ruach Ha Elohim Ha Yahweh, the Ruach, the Spirit of God. The Spirit of Truth, Emeth, Truth. And this is named many times in the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, and it's a term that's also used in John's Gospel. So the Holy Spirit is, the Spirit of Truth is related to the Paraclete, however. Now, this title, which is used 150 years later in John's Gospel as another name for the Paraclete or Strengthener, This Greek spirit was neuter, and the Greek parakletos is masculine. So now we have the spirit as masculine, it's divine. It's not a term used by Yeshua. This is part of the developing marginalization of women and the feminine aspect of God in the Christian churches. The Kabbalistic equivalent of the paraclete in John's Gospel is the feminine bat kol, which literally means a daughter of the voice. When in the fallen tree, the place occupied by Tifereth is now blank, and it is usually pictured with a little circle with dots around it, and it is the place where the guidance of God would come through. It's the place where the guidance, it's like the paraclete. It's the daughter of the voice of God who guides the Jewish sages, and that's how they got their guidance from wisdom through the Bat Kol in this fallen world. Now, Shaitan and the Elilim, Shaitan or Satan, later devil, was the accuser. In the intertestamental stuff, the archangel Satan rebels against God, and Michael overcomes him in battle and casts him out of Ha'olam with his host. And that's associated with the descent of the sons of the Elohim, the sons of God, who interbred with the daughters of men to create this race of giants, which is like the Greek Titans, and the destruction of the first world, out of which only Noah remained. And it's parallel to the expulsion of Adam and Eve from Eden, from the third heaven. Now, the fallen angels, the Haggadah about the fallen angels, is very much elaborated in the books of Enoch, the Enochian books, which were very much revered by the early Christians. And that apocalyptic literature, much of which is written in Aramaic, God had emanated the four Olamim and Ha'olam, and Satan and his Grigori, or his angels, his hosts, were exiled into the fifth heaven of this Olam. This is the Olam of Asiya. This is the lowest level. After interbreeding with the daughters of men. That's really what was the cause, and that's why they were cast out of heaven, because they had done that sin. So that's you find that in the secrets of Enoch. And the human followers of these people, the ones who followed the secret knowledge of the magicians and the sorcerers and the things people associated with them, were exiled into the second heaven, which became purgatory. That's in the system of Enoch. That was Gehenna. Now, Gehenna was on the dark side of the third heaven, and on the light side is the Pardes, where the righteous dwell after death, and where God descends and dwells with them. Because in the Pardes, Emmanuel, God is with us. God will dwell with us in the Pardes. So he comes down with all his glory, and he is there with the people, and then he goes back to his throne. So that's where Paul made his Merkabah ascent. Satan and the fallen hosts manipulate power from the Klippot. They are not the Klippot, and they are not controlled by the Klippot. They manipulate that power, negative energy, these negative husks of reality. That's their job. They're supposed to do that. And the slaves of these fallen hosts of angels are the Elilim, which literally means little nothings, little voids, little negativities. And they exist on Earth in the sublunar realm. They're the guys we have to worry about. Now, as part of the birth pangs of the Messiah and the initiatory trials of the just and of the righteous on Earth, because in order to purify them, these Elilim operate under the orders of the satanic hosts to test and try human beings and have them do it the hard way or the easy way. And so Satan is the prince of this Olam. He rules what goes on here. He's not the sovereign. He's a prince. God is the sovereign. And the beasts of all the evil governments and things operate under his negative powers. And it's his job to do that. Paul says the world is ruled by powers and principalities, which are astrological, planetary, and satanic archons. And God permits this. He's a kind of cosmic alchemist. What he's doing is he's He's purifying us as an alchemist would purify metals. And when Yeshua said, I saw Satan fall as lightning from heaven, he's declaring that Satan has now brought his hosts onto earth, down from the fifth heaven, for the final big purification. That's the alchemist has now poured this out of this flask and put it into the next flask, and we're going to start heating it up. And so it's going to be a purification by fire for God's Malkuth. And the birth pangs of the Messiah, or the initiatory trials of the new humanity, now begin, and they will last for a day of the Lord, which is thousands of years. That was the understanding of what Yeshua says, I saw Shaitan fall like lightning from heaven, because he's no longer in the fifth heaven. All of his people are now down here like a raging lion going around doing the whole thing to everybody. And boy, the early Christians found out about that real quick. The score was Christians nothing, lions 50. You know, that's how it went in some of those things. Now, Yeshua and Shaitan is very interesting. Satan's function in the Malkuth, the archangels, you have to understand, are created as emanations of Godhead. Satan, the archangel, is an emanation of God. He's there for a function, to do some work of God. Now, we name the angels by the functions they fulfill. For example, Ori El. Ori means light. El means of God. Ratzi El is the mysteries of God. Angel that reveals the mysteries of God. Shaitan, the accuser, his function was to oversee the testing and trying of souls. And that was God's deal. That was what God wanted. He's fixing things. He's still creating the universe. We're still part of being created. Now we test and try our own souls when we accept this dark guidance of Satan. I like James's quotation. He said, let no man say when he undergoes trials, this is in the book of James, the Epistle of James, which is probably related to traditions that were related to the brother of Yeshua. It says, let no man say when he undergoes trials, I am being tested by God. For God cannot be tested with evil, neither does he test any soul. But every man is tested by Satan when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed by his own Yetzer Hara, his own evil impulses of his own heart. So that's why I like this Diabolos. The devil is the evil of our own nature. So here we have the typical, soul trial, the good angel and the bad angel, and the poor person's soul suffering in the middle and being torn and all this sort of thing. The devil made me do it and all that kind of stuff. But that ain't really it. You made yourself do it. You allowed yourself to do it. So Yeshua says to his chief disciple, Shimon, Shimon, lo, the adversary did ask permission to sift your soul as wheat, but I prayed for you that your faithfulness may not fail. Because when you are initiated, when you get into a higher position, you become raw meat, you attract this, you're going to be tested. That's why the absolute first empowerment you do is the empowerment over dark forces after you initiate. If you just did the initiation, nothing else, you would have it all hanging out and you'd be in a tough situation. And a lot of people, when they do THG, at the end of, after the first initiation, they go a long time before they ever come back for more because they're dealing with a lot. And I warn people about that. The divine function of Satan is to facilitate the purification of souls by separating the wheat from the chaff and exposing all spiritual weakness. It's to crucify the old Adam. Paul says we must crucify the old humanity by exposing all our own flaws, being raised up on it and seeing what's there. And very often the only way you can see it is when after you've done it and you look back and say, oh my God, I did that. Did I do that? Oh hell, I regret that very much. Satan, the adversary, works through the demonic allies, which are the Elilim, that his hosts, the dark angels of the world of Yetzirah, or world of formation, command and control, according to different functions, is the theory. The Elilim are psychic entities that are filled with negative energies of the Klipot, but they're intelligent entities. They are vampiric or parasitic in that they are animated and draw their life by sucking vital force, or dom, which is blood, which is life, which is an astral thing as well as a physical thing, from an incarnate host, while activating the negative forces of the Yetzer Hara at the heart of that victim. So, very often in exorcism and in this kind of work, people who are possessed are also very weakened and very drained, and they get very sick. And there's there's two levels. There's what we call obsession, which is something that really comes through the back of the neck, the nape of the neck. When you do this work, this is where you would visualize this energy. And it's pretty easy to separate that energy from a person temporarily, but they can invite it back in and they can be vulnerable to it. But possession, where they actually start speaking through them and controlling their bodies and their actions through the solar plexus, the animal solar plexus. And that is much more difficult to deal with. In the early church, the first century, the early Christians were very famous exorcists. There have been Jewish exorcists who used Solomonic magic and different formulas and things like this to command things to come out. They always have to learn their names and force them to give them their names. And it was a long struggle. If you've ever seen any YouTube pictures of people doing exorcisms, I saw one Islamic exorcism the other day. It was an hour long. It took, and it was quite a struggle, quite a fight, to work with that. And the trouble with it is, as Yeshua said, once you clean the house out, once you sweep that room clean, then the evil forces go out and they bring 5 more and more evil in themselves and come back in, finding it all swept and clean, and come inside. There has to be something to keep them from coming back in. The wisdom you find in the Agni Yoga writings of Helena Roerich is that it really takes a few years, and people have to live in very pure environments like pine forest or down by the ocean, to really, until they really close their gates and build up their immunities from this sort of thing. I'm clicking the wrong thing again. Now, this is how God trains and initiates the Bar Anash, the new humanity, to become a worthy co-steward and co-creator and divine sovereign of the throne. None of us are ready for that. I mean, when we get power, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's true. None of us can really handle it. We've got to go out and get our 5-diamond prostitute, or 7-diamond prostitute, or whatever, no matter what a good guy you are. Yeah, it just goes. And so we have a lot to go. We're not really ready for all the power that's coming to us and that's coming to us in the world. We really don't handle nuclear power very well. He talks about his relative who developed deuterium and got turned into the bomb, and all that kind of stuff. He developed it for energy. And so this is the way things happen on the earth and with us. We are impure, and we need, and there's a great deal of trial that we have to go through. And so that's why Satan has been made the prince, not the king, not the ruler, not the sovereign, but the prince of this world. And Origen, who I told you about with the clamshell before, had a theory of the final end of time of all things, the apokatastasis. And he said at the end of this world, Satan will be redeemed. Everything will be all one, and everything will be good. And that was his theory. That was another thing he was condemned for, by the way, at the Council of Nicaea. But if you are a Mormon...
Don't look at me. I graduated from that school a long time ago.
Okay. But in Mormon teaching, and actually in some Gnostic teaching and in Kabbalistic understanding, in the Mormon understanding, which I wouldn't agree with because I don't think Yeshua was an archangel, but Jesus who was Jehovah, and Satan was Lucifer, and they were brothers originally, and they'll be reunited again. That's a Mormon teaching, but it actually is a Gnostic teaching and some other kinds of things, but not quite done that way. But the idea is that Shaitan, Satan, has a function that is ultimately good. Even if you read the Canterbury Tales, and you read the Pardoner's Tale, the Summoner's Tale, He says he's talking to the devils about how they go around and this evil man is doing these evil things to people. And how does this happen? And he says, why does God permit this to go on? And he said, and the answer is, well, God controls all this stuff. We just do what God wants us to do for whatever his purposes are. And so it ain't so mysterious, really. Evil happens, crap happens on the earth, and just like earthquakes happen, they're not acts of God. If we know how to build good houses, they don't hurt us. But we have to learn the hard way, and we're learning the hard way, but the only way we learn is the hard way. When we learn enough, we know how to go through things the easy way and not go through the hard way, and that's what wisdom is all about, but it doesn't mean we don't go through things. So that's the philosophy of all of this. And Yeshua never said, oh, now you're going to have bliss, everything's going to be nice and good and all that, you know. He said very much different things, and that's what it's about. Now, let's talk about exorcism. The Elilim are elemental discarnate spirits of various species, and they're animated by the Qliphoth, these inverted negative forces that oppose humans and all positive energies and forces. Yes.
Let's go back for a minute, because I've heard that philosophy before, and it kind of bothers me. Seems to me like it's a cop-out to chalk up everything bad that happens to Satan.
We'll have discussion and express opinions when it's discussion time. I'd rather not be interrupted with opinions, okay? Thank you. We'll do this when the time for discussion is. I only ask you to raise hand when you want something clarified or something like that. But we will discuss this when we get to that point. So the Elilim possess the nephesh, or the personalities or the astral bodies, what are we going to call it, of earthbound souls. Somebody who's been very evil in his life, and he was so attached he's unwilling to let go. He can't, even after he's dead, he doesn't die, he hangs around. And it could be an animal, it could be a human, or an astral remnant of a once incarnate being that holds itself in form by draining vital force from people or animals. That's the definition of the Elilim. Yes?
So this implies that animals also can be people or make moral choice.
Well, okay, we're not talking about evil, we're talking about negative forces, right. Dark forces. And animals, yes, can be possessed by dark forces and they can do very bad things. Yes, in fact, they do all the time. Essentially, they are vampiric, like the lamia or the succubus or the incubus, including being sexual draining things like succubus and incubus, which is related to wet dreams and things like that people had. They're a kind of a species of what we might call a ghost. The remedy is that an incarnate nephesh, that is a human soul, for example, has to be released from obsessing or possessing Elilim, because by means of which the possessing Elilim themselves must then be released from the qlipotic forces that are in them through dissolution and second death. In other words, the demons have to be killed. Not the people, the demons have to be killed. That's what Vajrapani does. Exorcism is demon killing, not killing people. It's releasing people from demons, or releasing people from the Elilim, and then releasing the Elilim from the Qliphoth. Now, all human and other animal souls, and we're talking about the lower natures of human, constantly are subject to negative influences through the evil Keizer, which we're going to explain soon much more about. Now, some people are vulnerable or willingly make themselves vulnerable to obsession. I talked about the nape of the neck and the solar plexus. The Jewish exorcist drew his authority from archangelic allies, using Solomonic magic to force an entity to give its name. This is a way of releasing a person from their own, they've become overcome by their own evil. It's like a disease. You can not get a disease if you live in a very healthy kind of way and eat healthy foods and things like that. You're very unlikely to get certain diseases. But let's say you get one, now you have to deal with it, and you have to do remedies. But let's say you just let it go. You've got a lump in your breast, and I don't have it anymore. I don't really think I have it. It's not really there. And then it finally gets to the point where it's really dangerous. You have to cut it out. And if it doesn't get cut out, it's going to kill the whole body. In other words, a point comes, a point of no return, when evil is not dealt with, negative forces are not dealt with, they can kill you, they can do things. And this is the whole business of what possession and obsession is all about. It's the cultivating of negativity. It's the cultivating of that, you're back to the light and seeing everything with the evil eye and so on. So the way that was done, the way that the Jewish spiritual psychic surgeon would work is he would find out the name of that obsessing entity. And once that was known, he could be commanded, he could be controlled. Now, Yeshua had intrinsic authority over all dark forces without resort to Solomonic magic, and he didn't have to, he did demand to know the names sometimes of the obsessing spirits, but sometimes not. I've seen, for example, around a really great saint, like Mother Jenny, when somebody who was actually obsessed with something, I never had anybody who was really heavily possessed, would come to one of the meetings, she would come in the door, I've seen the person just fall down on the floor and start screaming and yelling, and then all of a sudden wake up and know what happened, and then she'd go and sit down. And that's, nobody did anything conscious. It was just the energy of Mother Jenny was so powerful. And any saint, anyone who has developed themselves, has not only a powerful good nature, they have a very powerful terrifying nature. And I invite you to look at that tonga over there of Padmasambhava and see the terrifying forms that he has developed, fire filled with black fire and things like that. And when a lot of times when evil spirits come near someone like that, they actually just, the person actually is self-exercised. They're just coming near that energy because evil spirits sort of look at it and go, eh, and they want to get away. They know they're in trouble if they stay. That doesn't mean they're permanently exercised. It just means for that amount of time they're going to behave themselves. But Yeshua had that kind of power. And he gave authority over dark forces to his 72 disciples, according to the New Testament stories. And that's the basis for the first empowerment in THG. And he taught them how to use it. And but they were not always successful in dealing with the heavy cases. And they had to call in the heavy duty to do it sometimes. Now, these powers are much diminished in the modern Christian churches. They were very powerful in the first century. And there was a lot of demon possession in the first century. We don't see it in our century so much. And people that think they're doing it very often are doing something very else, or working on a psychological level. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you real exorcism done in the Russian Orthodox Church, the contemporary Russian Orthodox Church. There are all English subtitles, but you can see what it really looks like. But it's not done, it's long, hard work, and it's done using crucifixes and all kinds of things on people, rather than just in a simple way that Yeshua did. And it's a struggle, it's a long struggle. But this is the actual authentic
А сейчас сменим тему. Мы расскажем вам об изгнании дьявола. Противоборство Бога и дьявола сейчас так же актуально, как и во все времена. И как 1000 лет назад место сражения – это человеческие души. Люди, одержимые бесами, стремятся в церковь, чтобы пройти ритуал очищения. О современных экзорцистах в репортаже Юлия Гробовская.
Сельский храм. За несколько лет он стал одним из главных центров экзорцизма. Одержимые дьяволом съезжаются сюда каждую пятницу, и здесь их вычитывает приходской священник отец Василий. Однако одного визита часто недостаточно. Для полного исцеления нужны долгие месяцы и даже годы.
Живуть як скоти. По-собачому гавкають, по-котячому, що хочете. А як? Це вір, це нечиста сила, орудує людьми. В храм не може зайти. Больний. Його ведуть, він тікає з храму, там що чудо, ловлять і доганяють, і мати гнуть, що хоче. І на його мати, на батюшка, він терпить.
Снимать на видео чин изгнания бесов обычно не разрешают. Но отец Василий убежден, что эти кадры могут спасти многих одержимых, которые еще не слышали об экзорцизме, а заодно убедить скептиков, что одержимость дьяволом – реальность. Это самые обычные проявления вселившихся демонов. Непроизвольные телодвижения, крики, рычание, паническая боязнь священных предметов. Несколько лет назад, потеряв жену, он собирался уходить в монастырь, но духовный наставник сказал: «В клетку всегда успеешь, иди спасать людей». С тех пор в помощи священник не отказывал никому.
С одной я, когда, значит, она приходила, они были дуже яростные, сразу до того матюкались, что ужасно. Некоторые люди даже на литургию, когда приходили они, то матюкались. Вот. А люди говорили: батюшка, если так будет, мы уйдем из церкви. Я говорю: детки, вы только поймите одно. А если бы с вами это случилось бы, и я бы сказал бы вам: выйдите из церкви, как вам нравилось потом или нет? Нет. Значит, мы должны терпеть, спасать их.
Сам видит духовно больных и очень много внимания уделяет духовно больным. И вычетку делает, и отдельно работает с ними. Сюда приезжает специально на вычетку. Я приезжал сперва с женой, потому что я сам не мог ходить. А теперь уже я сам прихожу.
Вычетка длится несколько часов. Сначала к телу бесноватого экзорцист прикладывает крест. Потом общий молебен и окропление святой водой. Для священника это огромное напряжение, для одержимых тоже.
Рука моя розкошає, я тоді нічого не зможу зображати. Мені моя жена треба поработати, як тебе достати. Подумати треба. Як тебе достати, розірвати гадюку.
Людмила Маймес снова собиралась умирать от рака. После операции ее здоровье только ухудшилось. Пришла на вычетку, и оказалось, что она боится Святого Креста и святой воды. У экзорцистов это верный признак одержимости.
Я нічого не чувствую. Я лично нічого не чувствую. А беса хрест пече. І того він кричить. В основному, як батюшка прикладає сюди ось хрест. І тоді от сильно він кричить. Пече його і забере свій хрест вонючий. Їм в церкві все воняє. Все святе їм воняє. Бесам.
5 лет назад в ряды экзорцистов вступил и отец Петр. Настоятель. За эти годы он определил саму сущность демонов.
Это разумные духовные существа, и нельзя их недооценивать. Бесов нельзя ни в коем случае недооценивать. Они знают все законы физики, химии, математики вместе взятых. Они знают тайны человеческой души. Тот человек заблуждается, когда думает, что это какой-то вымысел, как нам вот люди думают, представляя это в каких-то фильмах, сказках и так далее, как добрые бесы там или белые колдуньи начинают помогать там и так далее. Ничего не бывает белого. Бесплатный сыр только в мышеловке, понимаете?
Противники экзорцизма – это чаще всего врачи-психиатры. Профессор Московского научно-исследовательского института психиатрии Юрий Полищук считает, что в ходе так называемой отчитки совершается эмоциональное стрессовое воздействие. И, несомненно, если речь идет о больных психическими заболеваниями, то такого рода процедуры обостряют состояние психоза.
Уйдите, суки, блядь! Уйдите, я боюсь, не надо, блядь! Потерилась! Уйди! Я сказал, я ненавижу! Уйди, потерилась!
Но православные экзорцисты это тоже хорошо понимают. Психически больных отправляют прямиком к врачу.
Видно, когда человек психически болен, а когда человек действительно одержим духом нечистым. И здесь, конечно, нужен опыт и нужна практика, чтобы распознать таких людей. Потому что если человек психически болен, и его начинаешь там вычитывать, и начинаешь производить какие-либо манипуляции и так далее, и молитвы, то просто-напросто ты этого человека еще больше усугубляешь его положение. Потому что психические заболевания и одержимость духом нечистым – это немножко две разные вещи.
Впрочем, побывав в психиатрической клинике, отец Петр решил, что 80% пациентов должны посещать вычетки. Одного он даже вылечил от шизофрении. Заведующая отделением призналась, что не видела такого за все 40 лет работы. Юлия Гробовская, Владимир Хребтович, Евгений Сафронов. Аналитическая программа «Постскриптум».
Okay, so there are a lot of things that you might have noticed in that particular presentation. You notice that people that do know what they're doing with exorcism, that there's an ancient thing that is not really known much about in modern Christian churches and so on, but still a lot of the understanding of how it's done is preserved in the Orthodox churches, some of them, and that they do know how to distinguish between a mental illness and exorcism, and that the spirits, the demons, hate everything that's good to them. Good things stink and smell bad and all this sort of thing. And you might notice that that it's quite a struggle to deal with people in this situation. You might also notice that the people that tend to be in this situation very often are more like peasants and we're not really highly educated and so on. Other things that go on. And these people very often are people that have a lot of really deep prejudices and they harbor very often some really deep resentments and things like that and cause real problems in that sort of way. So we see different things. We mostly see psychological problems in our culture, in our society, or obsession. Obsession is a very different than possession. So I've emphasized a lot of that before. But Yeshua said, "Take heed that you do not look down upon those who are spiritual children. For I tell you, in heaven their angels always behold the face of the Father and Mother in heaven." And each person is guided by Kabbalistic teaching that Yeshua talks about, by an angel, each person. And all people have this guidance and protection regardless of how aware of it they might be. So we do have guardian angels, just like Mama said when we were little kids, if she said that. The Pythagorean concept was of the algoides. It was the golden being, the golden presence, and we sometimes refer to it as the higher self. But we, in theosophical doctrines and Rosicrucian doctrines, people start out with an angel. As they grow and they progress, they get so that they come under the guidance of saints from the eighth heaven, from the Agdoad. And you go from one teacher to another teacher, or one guide to another guide eventually, and then the time comes when finally you are guided not by another emanation, by an angel, or by even other high teachers, but by your own highest monadic nature. And that was the idea of the algoides and the Neoplatonic and theosophical ideas and so on. Yeshua said, "Those who make themselves worthy of the Hema," which is translated as the resurrection from the dead. A lot in Christianity talks about resurrection as either Jesus is resurrected or the good people will be at the end of time on the judgment day resurrected. But the Hema was an ongoing process, and Yeshua's ideas and in Pharisaic Judaism was something that happened immediately or very soon after death. But he said those who make themselves worthy of it neither marry, they're neither male, nor are given in marriage, or are they female, but they exist in the same androgynous state as the angels that are in heaven. And so the concept of the angels is that they are androgynous. And that means, in the ancient world, very often the term male is what covered that sort of thing. But those who sanctify their lives and their souls achieve this chema, which is continuity of consciousness, or the awakened or enlightened state of liberation after death. And they do not go to the third heaven to parties. They go to the Agduad, the eighth heaven. They make it through all the seven spheres. They're able to do that. Like angels, they have no biological sex, but they're spiritually shalem, which means complete and perfect. And they're androgynous. A Yahid has union with Yahida. This is one complete deity or one complete being, and this is the way it's represented in Tibetan Buddhism. The Gnostic eons and the Hindu and Buddhist deities and the Father, Mother God and Samael and Lilith and Shiva and Shakti and all this sort of thing are understood, the deities have their Shaktis and this sort of thing, are understood to be of the combination of not just masculine and feminine, but male and female. Although we understand it in psychological terms as masculine and feminine, and we understand it as integrating aspects of psychological personality, but on a spiritual level, it's something more profound than that. Now, the chema, or the resurrection, that can occur after death is like this. It's not necessarily an event that happens to all beings at a given future time in the day of judgment, even when the world ends. It was something that the Pharisees referred to as happening to the righteous, to the just. Paul, and in this case he's kind of echoing the Basor of Yeshua, says, don't you know that we ascended saints shall judge the angels? In other words, even though man is created a little lower than the angels, at some point we become higher than the angels. The first Adam, he says, was made, quote, a little lower than the angels, but the new Adam will share the throne of Godhead far above the angels. So angels are part of the process of the purification of the human soul, the initiatic trials. They're the ones that are helping. They're the ones that are helping us to go the right way, make the right choices, and do the right actions. So now, what is chema, the resurrection? It's also known as the life of the Olam. Here's basically what I think the death process is, and it certainly fits the patterns of things in Yeshua's teaching. The divine spark, or the Yetzer, the image of God. The Yetzer HaTov is another name for it. It's the good Yetzer, because the bad Yetzer is not real, it's negative. This divine spark withdraws from the physical body. And some people say it withdraws from the crown, and some say it does other things. There's all kinds of things about it. But it's still clothed in the nephesh, the astral body, the sidereal body, the personality. In other words, you still have sex and personality and the memory of physical things, and you're still tofa after you die. But you remain conscious and mobile in this astral mental plane for about 40 days. Normally, after 40 days, the nephesh dissolves back into its astral elements, and the divine spark withdraws to the Pardes, the third heaven. Or it might, and in the third heaven, it may withdraw to Gehenna, where it goes through certain kinds of purifications before it is admitted into the Pardes. That's the Kabbalistic idea. In an abnormal case, the nephesh is enslaved by Elilim and burdened with klipoth, and it tries to remain conscious because it's got so much attachment that it does so by attaching itself to beings and sucking vital force from animal bodies, which could be human or animal. And this gives us what we call possession or obsession, and the remedy is exorcism. You have to cause it to fall asleep and dissolve. You have to cause it to fall asleep and undergo what we call the second death, which is that's the normal death out of that astral body, and that releases a divine spark. Now, in the pardes, the righteous, many normal people will be sort of sleeping and dreaming in the shalom, the peace of the pardes. And in Theosophy, they called it divachan, and it was where you would dream and you would have any dreams that you needed. You would review your life and you would get ready for your next incarnation and so on. But the tzaddikim, the righteous ones, do not reawaken in the pardes. They reawaken, they ascend to the 8th heaven. He said they're not going to return. They've achieved what some people would call moksha, liberation. And they become part of the process of telepathically guiding advanced human souls who can receive their guidance. This is the business of the Christian saints. You pray to the saints to help you and so on. The most advanced of these would be Enoch, who had said was transformed into Metatron, the great angel. And the 9th heaven is at the throne of God, at the palace of God, and the 9th heaven is eventually a place through which these saints are slowly drawn up into final unity. They're all part of the Bar Enosh. About reincarnation, Yeshua said John was a reincarnation of Elijah. Messianic Jews and many early Christians taught reincarnation. That's why Yeshua was asked the question, was this man born blind for his own sins or for his parents' sins? Because there were different views of that. But we don't have a definite teaching about that. We just have some indications. So the Kima is an awakened or enlightened state of, and it literally means a standing one. In fact, the word anastasis, which is the Anastasia, is named after that. Anastasis is the Greek form, and it means the same thing, a standing one. And in the Gnostic literature, you will read about the standing ones and so on. And it means to be standing up again, to be conscious again. The Hasidic teaching was that all the tzaddikim entered into Gehinnom for a final purification and then into the Kima. So there was a time of purification, no matter who you were and how righteous you were. The Christian teaching was that only Jesus was in the state of Kima, and that on the day of the Lord, immediately after the second coming of Jesus, all souls would be awakened for judgment, be cast into eternal damnation or into heaven. So that's the difference. There is an alternate teaching. After death, human souls are either cast into hell for eternal damnation, or they enter purgatory, which is like Gehinnom, to prepare for paradise. In the Catholic teachings, the Pope could shorten the days in purgatory for special considerations like donations of money to the church and stuff like that. They were called indulgences. And that was the big thing the Protestants capitalized on, is the corruption of the church and selling indulgences for your afterlife, for people who had died and so on. You could shorten their days in purgatory. Well, don't laugh. Everybody's got it. Even the Buddhists have it, you know. So.
There was a really good movie called Luther. Did you see the movie Luther with Joseph Fiennes starred as Luther? It was all about that. He played Martin Luther. It's an exceptional movie. He did a really good job acting. It was all about that, the indulgences and the corruption and how he started thinking.
Did it show him while he was sitting on the toilet that the inspiration came to him that the basis for righteousness was belief, faith. Faith is what was necessary. Yeah, that's when he had that revelation. Yeah, Martin Luther was the one who called the Epistle of James the Epistle of Straw and wanted it stricken from the canon because it contradicted his doctrine of salvation by faith. If you believe the right stuff, you're safe. You know, you're saved. Because he didn't like that thing about faith without works is dead. You know, that was that's.
Well, he just misunderstood faith and faithfulness.
Yeah, well, but he had the word faith in Latin comes from the word credo very often, and when it's translated that way, and it also can be other things too. But so and now you get to say your piece. So,
No, I was just, you know, you talked about how the devil has a purpose and the devil is testing us. And it just seems like too easy to me to chalk up all bad things that happen to the devil and all, like for instance, after 9/11, people said, well, why did God let that happen? Because even if the devil tests us with small things like, say, temptations, you got to believe that God's powerful enough to not let something like 9/11 or the Holocaust or, things like that happen.
I don't have to believe anything. I have found that believing is not a good way to go because it's opinion, and it's always wrong and it always changes. But I'll tell you this, the idea that God should have done something is your opinion, your idea. And Yeshua had several parables about the absence of God. He says there was a great landowner and he left all the stuff in the care of his servants, and he went away. And when he came back, some of them were doing a good job, and some of them were fighting, and some of them were oppressing the other ones, and he punishes the bad guys and rewards the good guys. And a lot of these stories of the absence of God are very important because that's our experience in the world. If you think that the way you want to prove that God is here in the world is you have to test God. I had a friend who was I went to grade school with, and he wanted to test God, and so he put a milk carton out in the porch and prayed every night that it would turn into a bicycle. And he got up every morning and didn't. And he said, "Well, this God stuff is a bunch of crap, guess what? We're on our own. And God doesn't intervene and do anything. It's up to us. We have to learn territory. And what's faithful means keeping faith with that primordial stuff that you know is right and not losing it. And the most faithful person, the suffering servant in Israel, he never had any rewards. God didn't come down and give him visions and give him little guidances and things like that. He just had to know what was right and follow it. That's a righteous person. And if you're that way, you pour out your soul to the end, is the way it's put. He poured out his soul to the very end, and therefore I will divide with him a portion with the great, and so on. That is what faith is, and fidelity is. So the idea of saying, well, God should have done this for me, and God should have done that for me. No, we have to do it for ourselves. And we're living in a world with a lot of people, with a lot of negative forces, and we are responsible for that world, and when we finally get it under control, okay, but it's not a cop-out to say, I don't think that any of this says the devil made me do it, the devil did this. I think dark forces are very real, and people that don't accept that there is a dynamic evil, and I call it negative force, dark force, that motivates people and causes events and does things, would have to think that the universe is all a perfect world. And there's a great satire on that that's done by Voltaire called Candide, where Candide is always trying to prove that it's a perfect world and everything's supposed to happen, yet God wanted this person to get hurt, and God wanted this person to die, and God wanted all this to happen, and it's a satire, and of course Voltaire is Jewish. And he's got a big satire in the Christian idea of this perfect world that we live in, where everything that happens is in God's plan. It's not in God's plan. If you're raising children, it's the only way you can understand this. If you have a child and you're raising children, you are not hovering over that child every minute and making him make the right decisions. If you do that, he'll never grow up. You have to let him free. And when he's free, he's going to fail. And then he has to learn by his failures. He has to learn the hard way, but he can make the hard way a little easier if he follows some wisdom and asks for some guidance. But that is what is being said by the Kabbalists, is that we are in this situation where we have to be faithful with what we know is right in ourselves, and it's up to us to make things right. It's up to us to execute righteousness and compassion and all these kinds of things, and shit will happen. It's going to happen. Yeshua said, you'll always have the poor with you. He said, these things will happen. It is of necessity that they happen. It's necessary that these evil things come. That just means it's part of the structure of the universe. If you want to have a universe, you want to have an incarnate universe, You've got to have a left foot and a right foot. You've got to have a positive and a negative. And that's what the whole business about dark forces is about. How do you navigate through that? That's what it's about. It's not a cop-out. There's no way to cop out of that. I don't think that there is.
But there is intervention.
What intervention?
I'm just asking, otherwise prayer and theurgy wouldn't work if there wasn't some way to have an effect on it.
Well, if you are in the image of God, your prayer and your prayers being answered has a much more complex thing than simply God sort of leaning down through the heavens and giving you something. So this idea of intervention of God into history, or intervention of God in your life, is a bad model. That's as bad a model as the devil may do it. I think that there's much more powerful way of understanding these kinds of things. And the use of certain kinds of things, even mantra, where you are creating a reality and doing a reality, and you can say, well, God now gave me this, or God did this, but if you make no effort, it's not going to happen. That's why Yeshua says, keep on knocking, keep on listening. He doesn't say knock and it'll be opened, ask and it'll be given. The word in the Hebrew word is even phrased in a proper Greek tense that doesn't mean just knock. It means keep on knocking, persevere in knocking, and that is the key. That's why the mustard seed grows, because it perseveres, and that perseverance is how you make prayer be answered. So, and I'm saying it never appears in the Bible, but the old guys used to say God helps those who help themselves. Well, there's a little bit more of that maybe that ought to be in the Bible, you know.
Another question. In here we talk about how all these creatures and things got messed up by the attraction of sex to women and whatever, and this guy's busy doing himself in. What is the proper understanding of our relationship with sex? If I understood this in its purest form, I would deny all human desire and just concentrate on being androgynous so I can be the pure godlike being.
Well, knowing what I know about you, I get a clamshell right away, you know, because...
Probably a good idea, but for the general public.
Well, let me just first say, all this Haggadah about the fall of the angels and all this kind of stuff, that's not something that I even bother with. I don't consider that stuff to be part of my map of consciousness. So that's something I want to say to begin with, okay?
So A is not related to B.
Yeah, not for me. I mean, I'm showing you how these ideas all develop and all this sort of thing. But as far as sex goes, sex is a very big word. It means a lot of things. If you find women attractive, and women's bodies attractive, and you find yourself attracted to women, well, guess what? So does every saint, you know. But if you make plans to entice somebody away from their husband, or if you make plans whether they fail or not or succeed, now it's your intent to go and carry out some kind of a thing that is going to be hurtful to people and hurtful to relationships and all this kind of stuff for perceived immediate gratification, like corporations do for money, things like that. Now you are doing something that is very bad. You are following the evil of the Keizer, which we're going to be talking about soon. So, Rosicrucians didn't even like people that didn't have good sexual impulses. Rosicrucians felt if you didn't have a lot of vital force and good sexual energy, you couldn't be really a very, very effective Rosicrucian. So they considered that to be a very positive characteristic, and so do I. But on the other hand, the abuse of all this kind of stuff in terms of how you choose to express it and deal with it and put it out, that comes out of you. It's your choice, your decision. And when you see yourself starting to fantasize about doing things that wouldn't be right, or mistreating people, or being unfair with people, or not being honest with people about your sexual doings and things like that, you're screwing up, and you have to be honest enough to look at yourself and say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I regret having done that in the past. One of the things that Buddhism says, a little book in your room here, is that regret is a positive force if it helps you to want to change something you've done and you look back on it. And that's why we say an evening is a good time to do contemplation. Look back upon what you've done and see how you would want to do it differently. If you look back objectively instead of in the heat of the moment, you know, and so on. So all that stuff is, again, up to you. It's up to you. And you can choose whether you want to be introspective or not. You can choose whether you want to evaluate how you do things or not.
You know, there's this idea that sex, money, and power are the three big evils, but really I think they're the natures that we have to learn to work with. Like the Sikhs say, make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because you can really do positive things. There are, you know, the early Christians that don't have any money, you know. I think that it's one of those things that we have to learn to control.
Well, what Paul said, and people get it wrong, he did not say money is the root of all evil. He said greed for money, greed for power, greed for these things. And that greed is attachment and use for your own selfish purposes. So if you want money for your own selfish purposes, you want to have more than the guy next door, you want to have power so you can control, that's a whole different thing than I'm going to build up the financial resources of the land of medicine Buddha so it can present the Dharma. You know? And that's why the Buddhists will pray for that. They will pray for money and so on, and that's okay. Gotta put a new roof on the church, so donate money, folks, here. As long as it doesn't go for those 5 diamond prostitutes, everything will be all right. But let's take a break.